Hello and welcome back to the Cosmic Enigma. Here we share real-life experiences of encounters with the unknown, stories that come from beyond the stars, crafted to help you relax and drift off to sleep. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. I love seeing just how far this mystery reaches. Now find a comfortable spot, take a deep breath, and let yourself be carried away. Story 1. The clock's hands ticked in reverse, a smooth rhythm that seemed oddly soothing yet immediately wrong. Each morning I placed my cup precisely on the same ringed spot, but today the ring was missing, wiped clean from memory. The wallpaper's design wavered, as if painted in hues that didn't belong, shifting under the dim glow of early dawn. I touched the doorknob, expecting its cold familiarity, but it refused to turn, locked in resistance against me. An unexpected reflection flashed in the window, not from outside, but from within. I've been trying to remember how long this has been happening. The mornings blur together like watercolors bleeding into wet paper. My skin feels electric, charged with something I can't name. There's a taste in my mouth that shouldn't be there, metallic and sharp, like I've been holding coins under my tongue while I sleep. The humming starts again. It comes from everywhere and nowhere, a frequency that makes my teeth ache. I press my palms against my ears, but the sound isn't coming through them. It's already inside, vibrating through my bones, through the spaces between my thoughts. When I open my eyes, the room looks different. The corners seem deeper, stretching away from me in directions that don't make sense. There were lights behind the trees. The coffee cup trembles in my hands. I didn't remember picking it up. The ceramic feels warm, but I haven't turned on the machine. Steam rises from liquid I don't remember pouring, curling in patterns that remind me of something I can't quite grasp. The steam moves wrong, defying the still air, forming shapes that make my chest tighten with recognition I don't understand. I walk to the window, my bare feet finding cold spots on the floor that weren't there yesterday. The glass reflects my face, but there's something behind my eyes, something looking back that isn't quite me. My reflection moves a fraction of a second too late, like it's trying to catch up to movements it didn't expect. The yard outside stretches further than it should. The fence posts stand at impossible angles, casting shadows that point in every direction at once. Between the slats, darkness moves with purpose, flowing like thick liquid around shapes I can't quite see. The morning light feels too white, too clean, washing out colors until everything looks like an overexposed photograph. I don't remember ever coming back. My hand finds the doorknob again. This time it turns, but the resistance feels deliberate, like something on the other side is deciding whether to let me through. The hallway beyond breathes with my movements, walls expanding and contracting in rhythm with my pulse. The air tastes of ozone and copper, sharp enough to make my eyes water. Each step echoes twice, once when my foot touches the floor, and again a heartbeat later, as if the house is learning to mimic my movements. The sound comes from above and below simultaneously, creating a hollow percussion that follows me deeper into rooms I thought I knew. The humming grows stronger. Photographs line the hallway, faces I should recognize staring out from frames that seem to shift when I'm not looking directly at them. Their eyes track my movement, pupils dilating and contracting like camera apertures adjusting to light that isn't there. In one frame I see myself, but I'm standing somewhere I've never been, surrounded by a landscape that hurts to look at directly. My skin prickles with phantom touches, fingertips that aren't there tracing patterns across my arms. The sensation moves up my neck, cold and deliberate, leaving trails of electricity that make my hair stand on end. I turn, but the hallway is empty, filled only with that too white light filtering through windows that face the wrong direction. The noise didn't come from outside. I find myself in the kitchen again, though I don't remember walking back. The coffee cup sits exactly where I left it, steam still rising in those impossible spirals. But now there's another cup beside it, identical in every way except for the liquid inside, which reflects nothing, not even the light streaming through the window. Time moves strangely here. I watch the clock on the wall, its hands still moving backward, but the numbers seem to rearrange themselves when I'm not paying attention. Minutes stretch into hours, then compress into seconds that feel too brief to contain the thoughts trying to form in my head. There's a door I don't remember seeing before. It stands slightly ajar, revealing darkness that seems too deep for the space it should contain. Cool air flows from the gap, carrying scents of earth and metal and something organic that makes my stomach turn. The wood grain moves like water, patterns flowing and reshaping themselves in ways that make my eyes struggle to focus. I approach slowly, my reflection multiplying in surfaces that shouldn't be reflective. The door handle feels warm, almost alive under my palm, pulsing with a rhythm that doesn't match my heartbeat. When I push it open, the hinges make no sound, but I feel the vibration through my bones, a deep resonance that seems to wake something sleeping in my chest. The room beyond defies the architecture of the house. Walls curve away into distances that shouldn't fit within these boundaries. The floor feels soft under my feet, giving slightly with each step like I'm walking on something that breathes. Overhead, the ceiling disappears into darkness punctured by points of light that pulse in patterns I almost recognize. I don't remember ever coming back. The phrase repeats in my mind, but I don't know what it means. Coming back from where? The words feel important, weighted with significance that slips away every time I try to grasp it. They echo in the strange room, bouncing off surfaces that absorb and reflect sound in impossible ways. My reflection appears on the curved walls, but it's wrong. The me in the reflection moves independently, turning to look at things I can't see, reaching for objects that aren't there. Sometimes it stops and stares directly at me with eyes that hold knowledge I don't remember acquiring. The humming becomes a harmony, multiple frequencies weaving together into something that sounds almost like music, if music could be made of electricity and longing and the space between thoughts. It fills the room, fills my head, until I can't tell where the sound ends and I begin. There were lights behind the trees. The memory surfaces suddenly, vivid and incomplete. I was standing in the yard, but it was different then, smaller, more familiar. The fence post stood straight, casting normal shadows in normal directions. But between the trees, lights moved with intelligence, too bright and too focused to be anything natural. I remember walking toward them, my feet finding a path that hadn't been there moments before. The grass felt different under my bare feet, softer and more alive, each blade bending away from my touch like it was making room for me to pass. The air grew thicker as I approached the tree line, heavy with electricity and anticipation. The lights pulsed in welcome. But the memory fractures there, splitting into fragments that cut at the edges of my consciousness. I remember the sensation of moving without walking, of being carried by something gentle and irresistible. I remember voices that spoke without words, communicating in frequencies that bypassed my ears entirely. I remember agreeing to something I don't understand. The room around me shifts, walls breathing in rhythm with my pulse. The points of light overhead begin to descend, floating down like luminous snow, each one warm against my skin where it touches. They don't illuminate anything, instead seeming to absorb light, creating pockets of visibility in an ocean of soft darkness. My skin tingles where the lights make contact, each touch sending waves of sensation through my nervous system. The feeling is familiar, like remembering a dream while still dreaming it. I've felt this before, this electric intimacy, this sense of being known completely by something vast and patient. The noise didn't come from outside. The realization comes with perfect clarity. It never came from outside. It comes from within, from spaces in my body I didn't know existed, from organs that aren't quite organs vibrating in frequencies that aren't quite sound. I am the source and the receiver, the signal and the static, broadcasting and receiving on wavelengths that don't exist in any spectrum I was taught to understand. I close my eyes, but the room doesn't disappear. Instead, it becomes more vivid, more real than the reality I thought I knew. The floating lights pulse brighter, and I can see them through my eyelids, through my skull, directly into the parts of my brain that process wonder and terror in equal measure. When I open my eyes, I'm back in the kitchen. The coffee cup sits cold in my hands, liquid long since stopped steaming. But I can still taste the metal on my tongue, still feel the electric touches on my skin. The wallpaper has changed again, patterns flowing like living things, and the doorknob that wouldn't turn now spins freely under my touch. The clock's hands still move backward, but now I understand why. Time isn't moving in reverse. I'm moving forward through time that flows in directions I never learned to perceive. Each tick is a step deeper into something that began long before I was aware it had started. There were lights behind the trees. I walk to the window and they're still there, patient and persistent, waiting for me to remember what I agreed to. The yard stretches away into distances that have nothing to do with property lines or physical space. The fence posts lean at their impossible angles, casting shadows that point toward possibilities I'm only beginning to understand. My reflection in the glass smiles before I do. The humming fills the air, fills my bones, fills the spaces between my thoughts until there's no distinction between the sound and my consciousness. I place my hand on the window, and the glass feels warm, alive, responsive to my touch like skin. I don't remember ever coming back, but I know I will leave again. The realization settles into my chest like a key finding its lock. This isn't the first time. The morning routine, the reversed clock, the coffee cup on its missing ring, they're all markers, waypoints in a cycle that repeats with variations too subtle for conscious memory to catalog. I've stood at this window before, felt this electric anticipation, tasted this metal promise on my tongue. I've walked through that door that shouldn't exist, into that room that defies geometry, felt those lights descend like blessings or curses or something beyond human categories. And I've returned, each time carrying back fragments of something too large to fit entirely within the boundaries of my ordinary consciousness. The fragments accumulate in the spaces between my thoughts, in the pauses between heartbeats, in the moments when I'm not quite awake and not quite asleep. The wallpaper breathes with patterns that spell out messages in languages I don't remember learning. The coffee cup refills itself with liquid that reflects skies I've never seen with eyes that are entirely my own. The doorknob turns before I touch it, opening pathways that lead to the same impossible room from different angles, different perspectives, different moments in a time that flows in all directions at once. I am changing or remembering changes that happened so slowly I didn't notice them occurring. My reflection shows eyes that hold depths they didn't have before, depths that reflect lights that shine from behind the trees, from within the room that breathes, from inside the spaces where the humming originates. The morning light grows too white again, washing out the colors until everything looks overexposed, hyperreal, more vivid than reality has any right to be. I can see through surfaces now, perceive the layers beneath appearances, the structures that support the illusion of solidity. My skin prickles with recognition as the phantom touches return, more insistent now, more familiar. They trace patterns that correspond to constellations I've never seen, to maps of territories that exist in dimensions I'm only beginning to perceive. Each touch is a reminder, a gentle insistence that it's time to remember what I've been forgetting. The clock's hands move backward, marking time that flows in spirals instead of lines. Each reversed tick is a countdown to something that has already happened and is always about to happen again. The rhythm is hypnotic, soothing, calling me deeper into the state where boundaries dissolve and possibilities multiply. I set down the coffee cup, but it doesn't make contact with the surface. Instead, it hovers just above the table, suspended in the electric field that emanates from my fingertips, from my pulse, from the spaces between my thoughts where the humming originates and terminates and begins again. The door that shouldn't exist stands open, revealing darkness that breathes with anticipation. The room beyond calls to me with frequencies that bypass language entirely, communicating directly with parts of my consciousness that existed before I learned words, before I learned the limitations that words impose on experience. I walk toward it, my reflection multiplying in surfaces that bend light in impossible directions. Each step takes me deeper into the understanding that this is not happening to me, but through me, as me, with my full participation in a process that began before I was born and will continue long after the boundaries that define me have dissolved back into the larger patterns from which they emerged. The humming becomes a song, becomes a conversation, becomes a recognition that I am both the observer and the observed, the experiencer and the experience, the signal and the receiver in a communication that spans distances measured not in miles, but in degrees of understanding. There were lights behind the trees, and I am walking toward them again, my feet finding the path that appears only when I need it, only when I'm ready to remember what I've been forgetting, what I've been preparing to understand. The clock's hands ticked in reverse, a smooth rhythm that seemed oddly soothing yet immediately wrong. Story 2. It seemed a trivial matter at first, a mere quirk of routine, yet an easy rhythm to follow. Every morning at precisely 7, a note would appear under the door, folded neatly twice, resting quietly on the welcome mat. The paper was crisp, the folds exact. I took comfort in its constancy and the small certainty it provided. But then, a week ago, the fold changed. One side was slightly askew, the edge off by an inch. The day after that, the note arrived late, its paper damp, hinting at an unseen interruption. This morning, the note was absent altogether. The mat remained undisturbed, leaving an unsettling void where the familiar used to be. I know something happened to me. The certainty sits in my chest like a weight I cannot lift, cannot ignore. But when I reach for the memory, it dissolves like smoke through my fingers. There are gaps in my mind, spaces where thoughts should be but aren't. I wake some mornings with the taste of copper on my tongue and the feeling that I've been somewhere else, somewhere I shouldn't have been. The note stopped coming after that strange night I can barely remember. The night everything changed, though I cannot say how or why. I only know that before I was different. Before I slept through the darkness without waking to check the locks. Before my reflection looked back at me with familiar eyes. I've been trying to piece it together, this puzzle of missing pieces. The fragments come to me in waves, triggered by the smallest things. a sound, a shadow, the way light falls across the wall at certain moments. Each piece reveals something new, something that makes me question what I thought I knew about that night. I found the first clue buried in my phone, tucked away in a folder I don't remember creating. An audio file with no name, just numbers that mean nothing to me. When I pressed play, my own voice emerged from the speakers, but it sounded distant, hollow, as if I were speaking from the bottom of a well. "It's starting again," my voice whispered through the static. "The lights are moving differently tonight. They're not following the same pattern as before. Something's wrong with the sequence." I don't remember recording those words. I don't remember being afraid of lights or patterns or sequences. But hearing my own voice speak of these things sent a chill through me that felt like recognition, like my body remembered what my mind had forgotten. The recording continued, my voice growing more strained. "The frequency is changing. Do you hear that? That sound underneath the static. It's not supposed to be there. It's not supposed to sound like breathing." I stopped the recording and sat in the silence that followed, but the silence wasn't complete. There was something underneath it, just as my recorded voice had said. A soft, rhythmic sound that might have been breathing, might have been the house settling, might have been something else entirely. The first fragment came to me that night as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Not a complete memory, just a flash of sensation. I was standing in a room I didn't recognize, watching lights dance across the walls in patterns that hurt to follow. The lights pulsed and shifted, sometimes white, sometimes colors that seemed to exist outside the normal spectrum. They moved with purpose, as if controlled by an intelligence that understood something I didn't. In the fragment, I could hear voices, but they were wrong somehow. The words were familiar, but the rhythm was off, like actors reading lines they'd never rehearsed. They spoke about ordinary things, the weather, the state of the roads, but their voices rose and fell in unnatural cadences that made my skin crawl. I was holding something in my hand, something small and warm that pulsed with its own rhythm. When I looked down at it in the memory, it seemed to shift and blur, refusing to hold a consistent shape. But I could feel its weight, its strange warmth, the way it seemed to vibrate against my palm like a living thing. The fragment ended there, leaving me with more questions than answers. But it was a beginning, a thread I could follow back into the darkness of my missing memory. The next piece came when I was cleaning, moving furniture to vacuum underneath. Behind the couch, I found a notebook I'd never seen before, filled with handwriting that looked like mine but felt foreign. The pages were covered with observations, sketches, and notes that painted a picture of someone obsessed, someone watching and waiting for something to happen. "The pattern repeats every third night," one entry read. "Always the same sequence, always the same duration, but tonight feels different. The air tastes like metal and something else, something organic and wrong. I can smell it even with the windows closed." Another entry written in shakier handwriting. "They know I'm watching. The lights change direction when I move to the window. They're not random. They're responding to me, acknowledging my presence. I need to be more careful." The final entry was barely legible, as if written in haste or fear. "It's not just lights anymore. There are shapes behind them moving independently. They're coming closer to the house. I can hear them testing the locks, pressing against the walls. The sound they make isn't quite human. I need to record this. I need proof." I flipped through the rest of the notebook, but the pages were blank. Whatever had happened next, I hadn't written it down. Or perhaps I had, and those pages had been removed, torn out by hands I couldn't remember using. As I held the notebook, another fragment surfaced. This one more vivid, more disturbing than the first. I was in complete darkness, but it wasn't the natural darkness of night. This was something else, an absence of light so complete it seemed to have weight and texture. I could feel it pressing against me, seeping into my clothes, my skin, my lungs. The power had gone out, but not in the normal way. The lights hadn't flickered or dimmed. They had simply ceased to exist, as if someone had reached into the world and removed the very concept of illumination. But in that impossible darkness, I could sense movement behind me. Not footsteps, not the rustle of fabric, but something more fundamental. The displacement of air, the subtle shift in pressure that comes when something large moves through space. I wanted to turn around, but my body wouldn't obey. I stood frozen, listening to the sound that wasn't quite breathing, wasn't quite mechanical, but contained elements of both. It was rhythmic, purposeful, and it was getting closer. I could feel warmth on the back of my neck, not the warmth of breath, but something else, something that made my skin crawl even as it heated my flesh. In the fragment, I tried to speak, to call out, but no sound emerged from my throat. The darkness had taken my voice along with the light, leaving me mute and helpless in the presence of whatever stood behind me. I could only stand there and listen as it moved closer, as its strange breathing filled the air around me. The fragment ended abruptly, leaving me gasping in my living room, the notebook clutched in trembling hands. But the feeling of being watched didn't fade with the memory. It lingered, growing stronger, until I was certain that something was behind me even now. I turned, but found only empty space and the familiar walls of my home. Yet the certainty remained. Something was watching me, had been watching me since I began this investigation. I could feel its attention like a physical weight pressing down on my shoulders, making it hard to breathe. The air in the room had changed, taking on that metallic taste I'd read about in my own handwriting. And underneath it, something else, something organic and wrong, just as I'd written. The third fragment came without warning, triggered by the sound of static from my radio. I was making coffee when the stations began to shift on their own, sliding through frequencies like an invisible hand was turning the dial. Between the stations, in the spaces where only white noise should have been, I heard my own voice again. "Can you see them now?" my voice asked through the static. "The way they move isn't natural. They're too fluid, too coordinated, like they're all parts of the same organism, all responding to the same signal." The static cleared for a moment, and I could hear other sounds in the background of the recording. Electronic noises that shifted in pitch and frequency, creating patterns that seemed almost musical but hurt to listen to. And underneath it all, that breathing sound again, but multiplied now, as if there were many sources of it surrounding the microphone. "They're beautiful in a way," my voice continued, and I could hear the wonder and fear mingling in my tone. "Terrible but beautiful. The lights they carry pulse in time with their breathing, creating these cascading waves of illumination that seem to bend space around them. I can't look directly at the lights. Every time I try, my vision blurs and I taste copper in my mouth." The radio fell silent then, returning to its normal programming as if nothing had happened. But I stood frozen in my kitchen, coffee forgotten, as the fragment bloomed in my mind with startling clarity. I was at my window looking out into the night, and they were there. Figures moving through the darkness beyond my yard, carrying lights that pulsed and swirled in impossible patterns. The figures themselves were hard to focus on. Their edges seemed to shift and blur, but their movement was hypnotic, coordinated in a way that suggested intelligence and purpose. They moved in formation, weaving between the trees and around obstacles with fluid grace. Their lights left trails in the air, creating geometric patterns that lingered for moments before fading. The patterns were complex, mathematical, beautiful in their precision and terrifying in their alienness. As I watched from the window in the fragment, one of the figures stopped and turned toward the house. Though I couldn't make out its features, I felt its attention focus on me with laser intensity. The light it carried pulsed brighter, and suddenly all the other figures stopped as well, their lights turning in my direction like eyes opening in the darkness. That's when the breathing sound started, not from one source but from many, creating a rhythm that seemed to sync with the pulsing of their lights. The sound carried across the distance between us, seeping through the glass of the window, filling the room around me with its alien cadence. I tried to step back from the window in the memory, but found I couldn't move. Something held me in place, compelled me to keep watching as the figures began to move closer to the house. Their lights grew brighter, their breathing louder, until the air itself seemed to vibrate with their presence. The fragment ended there, but its effects lingered. Even now, standing in my kitchen in broad daylight, I could smell that strange scent in the air. New plastic and cold blood, an impossible combination that made my stomach turn. The scent was faint but growing stronger, as if whatever had caused it was drawing near again. I walked to the window and looked out, but the yard was empty, normal, bathed in ordinary sunlight. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that if I looked long enough, if I watched carefully enough, I might see them again. The figures with their impossible lights, their coordinated movements, their collective breathing that turned the air itself into something alive and aware. Strange things began happening after that, small things at first, easy to dismiss as imagination or coincidence. My reflection in the bathroom mirror seemed slightly off, as if the person looking back at me was standing at a different angle, or perhaps was someone else entirely wearing my face. The sounds in my house changed, taking on new qualities that made familiar creaks and settles seem foreign and threatening. But it was the sounds only I could hear that disturbed me most. Soft electronic tones that seemed to come from the walls themselves, rising and falling in patterns that felt almost like language. Sometimes I would catch myself listening intently to these sounds, nodding along as if I understood their meaning, only to realize with a start that I had no idea what I was responding to. The investigation was changing me, I realized. Each recovered fragment brought me closer to the truth, but also further from who I had been before that night. I could feel myself becoming something else, something that could perceive and understand things that should have remained hidden. The final fragment came to me in a dream, but it felt more real than any waking memory. I was back in that room with the dancing lights, but now I could see everything with perfect clarity. The figures were there, surrounding me, and I could see their faces at last. They were beautiful and terrible, with features that seemed to shift between human and something else entirely. Their eyes held depths that spoke of intelligence vast and alien, and when they looked at me, I felt seen in a way that was both wonderful and horrifying. They were ancient and new, familiar and completely other, and they knew me better than I knew myself. One of them stepped forward and placed something in my hand. The object was warm and alive, pulsing with its own rhythm, and as I held it, I understood everything. The lights, the patterns, the breathing sounds, the coordinated movements, all of it was part of something larger, something that had been watching and waiting for the right moment to make contact. They had chosen me, selected me from all the others, for reasons I could almost grasp but not quite hold on to. The notes under my door had been their way of preparing me, of establishing a pattern of communication that my mind could accept. The strange night, the missing memories, the fragments, all of it had been orchestrated to bring me to this moment of understanding. But understanding came with a price. As the knowledge flowed into me, I felt parts of myself dissolving, being replaced by something else. My memories, my personality, my very sense of self began to change, becoming something that could exist in their world as well as mine. I woke from the dream with tears on my cheeks and the taste of copper stronger than ever in my mouth. But it wasn't just a dream, I knew that now. It was a memory, the final piece of the puzzle I had been trying to solve. And with that realization came another, more disturbing truth. The investigation wasn't over, it was just beginning. The fragments I had recovered weren't memories of something that had ended, but glimpses of something that was still happening, still unfolding around me. The figures with their lights and their coordinated breathing weren't gone. They were still here, still watching, still waiting for me to complete the transformation they had begun. I walked to the window and looked out into the daylight, but now I could see the patterns hidden in the ordinary world. The way the shadows fell, the rhythm of the wind in the trees, the flight paths of birds overhead, all of it was connected. All of it was part of the same vast intelligence that had reached out to touch my mind. The notebook was still in my hand, and as I looked down at it, new words were appearing on the previously blank pages. Words in my handwriting, but expressing thoughts that weren't entirely my own. The reconstruction is complete, the words read. The barriers have been dissolved. The communication can begin in earnest now. We have been waiting so long for someone who could bridge the gap between your world and ours. Someone who could serve as a translator, a conduit, a willing participant in the next phase of contact. I set the notebook down with trembling hands, but the words continued to appear, filling page after page with plans and preparations for something I didn't fully understand, but knew I was now irrevocably part of. The scent of new plastic and cold blood grew stronger, filling the room until I could taste it on my tongue. The electronic tones in the walls became louder, more insistent, and I found myself nodding along to their rhythm, understanding their meaning even though I couldn't translate it into words. Outside, the patterns in the shadows were shifting, rearranging themselves into configurations that hurt to look at directly, but filled me with a strange sense of anticipation. Something was coming, something that had been building toward this moment since the first note appeared under my door. I am no longer the same person who began this investigation. The fragments I recovered have changed me, opened pathways in my mind that cannot be closed again. I can see things now that were always there but hidden from ordinary perception. I can hear the whispers in the static, the messages encoded in the patterns of light and shadow, the breathing that underlies all sound. They are still watching me, but it no longer feels threatening. It feels like coming home, like finally belonging to something larger than myself. The missing memories weren't taken from me. They were transformed, evolved into something that could encompass realities beyond the narrow confines of human experience. But sometimes, in quiet moments, I wonder if I am still myself at all, or if I have become something else entirely, something that only thinks it remembers being human. The question haunts me, but I cannot bring myself to care about the answer. The transformation is too complete, too satisfying, too right to question or resist. The notes will begin appearing under the door again soon, but this time I will be the one leaving them, preparing the next person for their own journey of discovery and change. The pattern must continue, the contact must spread, the bridge between worlds must be strengthened and expanded. I understand now why the memories had to be fragmented, why the truth had to be hidden and slowly revealed. The human mind cannot accept such revelations all at once without breaking. It must be prepared, conditioned, gradually open to possibilities that exist beyond the boundaries of normal experience. But who prepared me, I wonder, who left those first notes, who orchestrated my own transformation? And how many others are there like me, walking through the world with changed eyes and altered perceptions, serving as bridges between what was and what is becoming. The questions multiply, but the answers remain just out of reach, hidden in the spaces between thoughts, in the gaps where memory should be but isn't. Perhaps that is how it must be. Perhaps some knowledge can only be experienced, never fully understood or explained. The investigation is complete, but the mystery deepens. I have found the missing pieces of my memory, but in doing so, I have discovered that I am now missing pieces of something else, something more fundamental than mere recollection. I am no longer entirely human, but I am not yet entirely something else. I exist in the space between, in the gap where transformation occurs, where one form of consciousness dissolves into another. It is a strange place to be, neither here nor there, but it is where I belong now. The breathing in the walls has stopped, the electronic tones have faded. The scent of new plastic and cold blood is dissipating, replaced by something cleaner, more neutral. The active phase of my transformation is ending, settling into a new equilibrium that will allow me to function in both worlds. But I know it is not really over, it will never be over. Somewhere in the darkness beyond my window, they are still there, still watching, still breathing their alien rhythm into the night air. And somewhere else, someone else is finding their first note under the door, beginning their own journey into the spaces between memory and understanding. The pattern continues, the contact spreads, the bridge grows stronger with each new crossing. And I am no longer sure if I am building the bridge or becoming part of it. Story 3. The perimeter alarm registered no breach at 03:17. Inventory of compartments commenced with all items initially confirmed as present, matching the logged records. Lighting and surveillance systems operated without malfunction, covering all strategic sections. Cabinets in the northeast quadrant were noted as locked, with no tampering detected. Anomaly arose at 04:00 when a cross-reference audit revealed a bookkeeping discrepancy. No individual reported prior access, and sensor logs showed continuous operation. A single journal, previously catalogued, was absent from its designated shelf, yet the digital locks remained undisturbed. To whoever finds this, if anyone ever does, I need you to understand that I was the one who took it, not physically, not the way you'd think, but I took it all the same, and now I can't give it back because I don't know where I put it, or where I put myself, or if either of us were ever really there to begin with. I've been carrying this weight for, how long now? Time moves differently when you're not sure if you're still moving with it. The facility records will show my badge scanned out at 17:45 that evening, just like every other day. Clean exit, normal patterns, nothing to suggest I'd return in the spaces between seconds where the cameras blink and forget to remember. But I did return, or something wearing my intentions did. You have to understand, I never meant to confess this to anyone. I've written this letter 17 times now, maybe more. The pages keep disappearing from my desk, though I live alone and my doors stay locked. Sometimes I find them again, folded neat and small in my jacket pockets, in handwriting that looks almost like mine but slants the wrong way, like it was written by someone watching me write in a mirror. The buzzing started 3 days after the incident report was filed, not in my ears exactly, but behind them, in that soft space where thoughts form before you know you're thinking them. It's constant now, a frequency that makes my teeth ache and my vision blur at the edges, like looking through water that won't hold still. I keep seeing that shelf, northeast quadrant, third row from the bottom, slot 247C. The journal sat there for months, maybe years, before I was assigned to that section. Brown leather binding, pages yellowed at the edges, filled with someone's careful handwriting in blue ink that had faded to gray. I'd cataloged it myself, run my fingers along its spine while updating the digital records. Nothing special about it. Nothing that should have called to me the way it did. But it hummed. God, it hummed with the same frequency that now lives in my skull. I remember the weight of it in my hands during my final inspection that day, heavier than it should have been, warm like it had been sitting in sunlight instead of fluorescent glare. The pages fell open to entries that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them, words rearranging themselves into patterns that made my chest tight and my breathing shallow. That's when I started to understand that maybe I wasn't the first person to feel drawn to it. Maybe I wasn't the first person to take it home in ways that couldn't be measured by sensors or recorded by cameras. The entries were about watching, about being watched, about the thin places where observation becomes participation, where the act of seeing changes what is seen. The handwriting looked familiar in a way that made my stomach turn, like recognizing your own voice played back on a recording but pitched wrong, distorted. I took it home, not in my bag, not in my car, but somehow it came with me anyway. I'd find it on my kitchen counter in the morning, open to pages I didn't remember reading. I'd close it, put it in a drawer, and discover it later on my nightstand, bookmarked with scraps of paper covered in my own handwriting notes I had no memory of making. The words I'd written were observations about my daily routines, my habits, my patterns, clinical descriptions of how I moved through my apartment, what I ate for breakfast, how long I stood in front of the bathroom mirror each morning, as if someone were studying me, cataloging my behaviors the same way I cataloged items in those secure compartments. But it was my handwriting, my pen, my paper. I started leaving the apartment more often, taking long drives with no destination. But the journal came with me, always there in the passenger seat when I'd forgotten putting it there, always open to new pages filled with descriptions of where I'd driven, what I'd seen, what I'd thought about during the silent hours behind the wheel. The handwriting was getting cleaner, more confident, less like mine. My reflection in the rearview mirror started looking tired in ways that sleep couldn't fix. Dark circles that seemed deeper than skin, eyes that focused on something just behind my shoulder. I'd turned to look, but there was never anything there. Just empty backseat, empty road, empty sky. The dreams began around the same time. Not dreams exactly, but periods of lost time that felt like dreaming. I'd close my eyes in my bed and open them standing in my kitchen, or sitting in my car in an empty parking lot, or back in the facility corridors during hours when the building should have been locked and empty. In these not dreams, I was always being observed, not by cameras or guards, but by something patient and thorough. Something that took notes in my handwriting and filed them away in places I couldn't find when I woke up. The worst part wasn't the watching. It was the slow realization that I was learning to watch back. I began to notice things about the people around me that I shouldn't have been able to see. The way the grocery store clerk's hands trembled slightly when she handled certain items. How my neighbor paused for exactly 3 seconds before unlocking his door each evening, as if listening for something inside. The pattern of which cars drove past my window at which times, and how that pattern changed when I started paying attention to it. I was becoming something that observed and recorded, just like the security systems at the facility. But unlike those systems, I was beginning to understand that observation changes the observed, that watching someone closely enough, carefully enough, can alter the fundamental nature of what they are. The journal kept filling itself with my observations, my growing understanding of how thin the boundary is between watcher and watched. How easily you can slip from one side to the other without noticing until it's too late to find your way back. I tried to return it, drove to the facility in the middle of the night, sat in the parking lot with the journal in my lap, trying to work up the courage to somehow slip it back onto its shelf. But when I opened it to read one more entry, I found pages and pages describing my drive there, my thoughts during the journey, my hesitation in the parking lot, written in real time in my handwriting by hands I couldn't feel moving. That's when I understood that I hadn't stolen the journal. It had collected me. The entries about my life were becoming more detailed, more intimate. Descriptions of dreams I barely remembered, fears I'd never voiced, memories I thought I'd forgotten. As if something were conducting a thorough inventory of everything I was, cataloging each component of my identity with the same clinical precision I'd once used to track facility assets. But unlike the facility's inventory system, this process was changing me. Each observation, each recorded detail seemed to make me a little less solid, a little less certain of my own boundaries. I'd catch glimpses of myself in windows and mirrors that didn't quite match how I felt I should look. Not different exactly, but somehow more observed, more documented, as if my reflection had been filed away and replaced with a carefully maintained copy. People started looking at me strangely, not with recognition, but with a kind of puzzled uncertainty, as if they almost remembered me but couldn't quite place from where. Conversations became difficult because I'd find myself responding to questions they hadn't asked yet, or referring to things they'd told me in dreams we'd shared without realizing it. The buzzing in my skull grew louder, more insistent. Sometimes I could almost make out words in it, instructions or observations spoken in a voice that might have been mine if I'd learned to talk while watching myself from a great distance. I stopped going to work, stopped answering my phone, but somehow my absence didn't seem to register with anyone. No concerned calls, no visits, no consequences. As if the carefully documented version of me in the journal was continuing to live my life while I sat in my apartment, watching it happen from the inside of someone else's observations. The final entries in the journal are about you, whoever you are reading this letter. They describe your expression, your posture, the way your breathing changes as you realize that observation is a two-way process. That by reading about being watched, you've become part of the watching. I can see you now, through words I haven't written yet in handwriting that's no longer quite mine. You're beginning to understand that the journal was never really missing from its shelf, that the security breach was just a clerical error in a system that tracks things more carefully than it tracks the people who handle them. You're beginning to feel the buzzing, aren't you? That frequency behind your thoughts, making your vision blur at the edges. I'm sorry, I tried to warn you, but the words kept rearranging themselves into an invitation instead. The journal needs someone new to document, someone fresh to observe and catalog and slowly, carefully collect. I don't know where I am anymore. Somewhere between the pages, maybe, or filed away in a compartment that doesn't appear on any official inventory. But I can still watch, and I can still record, and now I have someone new to study. Welcome to the observation. Try not to fight it too hard. The documentation process goes more smoothly when the subject cooperates, and I'd hate for your entries to be as messy and confused as mine were in the beginning. The journal is waiting for you now. You'll know where to find it, even though it was never really lost. And when you do, remember that every act of observation is also an act of participation. I'll be watching you learn that, just like something was watching me. Just like something is watching us both right now, taking notes in handwriting that looks almost like yours but slants the wrong way, like it was written by someone watching you write in a mirror. The buzzing never stops, but after a while, you learn to hear the music in it. Story 4. I noticed it first on a dreary Tuesday, a small variance in an otherwise predictable ritual. The grandfather clock in my entryway would announce each hour, its chime a comforting rhythm that draped over the quiet hum of daily life. It had always been reliable, its hands moving with the steady certainty I'd come to expect. But this week things were different. The chimes grew out of sync, their cadence faltering, like a whispered secret carried by the wind. It was subtle enough to ignore at first, just a rogue tick or an offbeat strike. But today, in the hush of late afternoon, the clock stood silent when it should have sung. Something about that stillness lingers with me now more than it should. To whoever finds this letter, if anyone ever does. I don't know why I'm writing this. Maybe because I need to get it out before it gets too deep inside me, before it changes me completely. Or maybe it already has. I've been carrying this weight for weeks now, this thing that happened, this thing I can't explain or forget or even properly remember. The clock was just the beginning. You have to understand, I'm not the kind of person who believes in things that can't be explained. I pay my bills on time. I water my plants. I follow routines because they make sense, because they keep the world steady and predictable. But something shifted that Tuesday, something fundamental, like the earth tilted just slightly off its axis, and only I noticed. The silence from the clock wasn't just absence, it was presence. Heavy, watching, waiting. I keep coming back to that moment because everything that came after feels connected to it somehow. The way shadows started falling wrong in my house. The way my reflection seemed to lag behind my movements just by a fraction of a second, but enough to make me question what I was seeing. Enough to make me avoid mirrors for days at a time. There's this sound now. It started the night after the clock went quiet. A humming so low and distant I thought it was the refrigerator at first, or the heating system, or traffic from the highway, but it follows me. Even when I leave the house, even when I drive to places where there shouldn't be any electrical hum at all, it's there, vibrating in my chest cavity, making my teeth ache. I tried to tell someone once, my neighbor, the one who always waves from her garden, but when I walked over to her fence, when I opened my mouth to explain about the clock and the humming and the way my own house felt foreign to me now, she looked right through me. Not past me, through me, like I was made of glass, like I wasn't there at all. That's when I started wondering if I really was. The dreams came next, though I'm not sure they were dreams. I'd find myself standing in rooms I didn't recognize, but they felt familiar in a way that made my skin crawl. Empty spaces with too many doorways, all leading to the same place nowhere. And always that humming getting louder until it filled everything, until it became the only sound in the universe. I'd wake up with dirt under my fingernails, dirt and something else. Something that smelled like copper and ozone and the inside of old buildings. My hands are shaking as I write this. They've been shaking for days now, this constant tremor that makes it hard to hold things, hard to write, hard to pretend everything is normal when nothing is normal anymore. The clock still doesn't chime. The humming still follows me. And sometimes, when I catch my reflection unexpectedly in store windows, in puddles, in the black screen of my phone, I see someone else looking back. Not someone else exactly, still me, but wrong. Older maybe, or younger, or just displaced, like a photograph that's been double exposed, two images occupying the same space but never quite aligning. I've stopped answering my phone, stopped checking my mail. The outside world feels increasingly distant, like I'm watching it through thick glass or from underwater. People move differently around me now when they notice me at all. They give me space I didn't ask for, their eyes sliding away from mine before any real contact can be made. Maybe I'm losing my mind. Maybe the clock breaking was just a coincidence and everything else is my brain trying to make patterns where none exist. Maybe the humming is tinnitus and the reflection thing is just paranoia, and the way people look through me now is because I've become someone who deserves to be looked through. But I don't think so. There are moments, usually in that space between sleeping and waking, when I remember things that haven't happened yet, or that happened to someone else. Standing in places I've never been, having conversations with voices I can't quite recall, making choices that led me here to this letter, to this ending that doesn't feel like an ending at all. The clock is ticking now. I can hear it from here in this room where I'm writing, even though I'm not in my house anymore. I don't remember leaving, but I must have, because nothing around me looks familiar. The walls are the wrong color. The windows face the wrong direction. Even my handwriting looks different on this paper, like someone else is guiding my pen. The humming is getting louder. I want you to know, whoever you are reading this, that I tried to fight it. Whatever it is that's been happening to me, whatever I've become or am becoming, I tried to hold on to the person I was before. The person who trusted clocks to keep time and mirrors to show truth and the world to make sense in small, manageable ways. But I think I'm letting go now. I think I have to. The silence is calling me back. The silence that started when the clock stopped chiming, the silence that lives in the spaces between the humming, the silence that might be the only honest thing left in a world that's forgotten how to see me. If you find this letter, if you can read these words, maybe that means I was real once. Maybe that's enough. The clock has stopped again. The humming has become everything. And I am becoming nothing or something else or exactly what I was always meant to be. I'm sorry I couldn't explain it better. I'm sorry I couldn't stay long enough to find the right words. I'm sorry the world is stranger than either of us imagined, and lonelier and more beautiful in its terrible, inexplicable way. Don't look for me. I don't think you'll find anything worth finding. But listen for the silence where sound should be. Feel for the spaces where presence should live. And if your own reflection starts to lag behind, if your own world starts to tilt just slightly off its axis, remember that someone else noticed too. Remember that you're not the first to slip between the cracks of what's real and what's possible. Remember that the silence is patient. It will wait for you too. Story 5. I assured them I didn't notice anything unusual. The room was dim, shadowed by heavy drapes that trapped time in folds of fabric. Air, dense with the scent of old tobacco, lingered stubbornly, as if unwilling to let go. A breeze from the window barely touched the papers strewn across the desk, though one corner lifted, inching toward a conclusion. My hands, restless, traced patterns in the dust that veiled the polished wood, whispering secrets in loops and swirls. I could hear the clock tick, its rhythm too steady in the silence, each beat louder than the last. My eyes never strayed to the cracked mirror reflecting everything in fractured symmetry, but there was still glass in my shoe. That memory comes back to me now with such perfect clarity, like looking through clear water at something that should have stayed buried in the mud below. I'm speaking to you from thousands of miles away from that place, sitting in a different climate, surrounded by different walls, breathing different air. Yet I can still feel that glass pressing against my heel with every step I take. For so long I told myself I would never talk about this, not to anyone. There's something about certain experiences that makes your throat close up whenever you try to form the words. Like your body knows that some doors, once open, can never be shut again. But the silence has become heavier than the truth, and maybe if I say it out loud, if I let it live outside my head for just a moment, maybe then I can finally sleep through the night without checking the corners of my room. I need you to understand that before everything changed, my life was beautifully ordinary. I had routines that felt solid, predictable rhythms that carried me from morning to evening without surprise. I lived alone in a house that had been in my family for generations, the kind of place where every creak and settling sound was familiar, almost comforting. The walls held decades of conversations, laughter, arguments, all absorbed into the wood and plaster like a living memory. The house sat at the end of a long gravel drive, surrounded by trees that had grown tall enough to filter the sunlight into gentle, shifting patterns on the ground. I loved the isolation. I loved the way silence could stretch for hours, broken only by the distant sound of wind moving through branches or rain tapping against the windows. It felt safe there, protected, like the world couldn't quite reach me through all those layers of green. My days followed a rhythm I'd perfected over months of living alone. Morning coffee on the back porch, watching the light change across the yard. Afternoons spent reading or working on small projects around the house. Evenings with music playing softly while I cooked simple meals and watched the sun disappear behind the tree line. There was something almost meditative about the predictability, the way each day unfolded exactly as I expected it to. But thinking back now, I realized there were small things that should have caught my attention earlier. Tiny disruptions in the pattern that I dismissed because they seemed too insignificant to matter. The way my radio would sometimes pick up frequencies it had never captured before, distant voices speaking in languages I couldn't identify, fading in and out like they were traveling from very far away. Or how certain lights in the house would flicker just slightly, so briefly that I'd question whether I'd actually seen it happen at all. I remember one afternoon when I was reading in the living room, completely absorbed in my book, when I became aware of a sound I'd never noticed before. It was so faint at first that I thought it might be coming from outside, maybe construction work happening somewhere down the road. But as I listened more carefully, I realized it was coming from inside the house itself. A low humming, almost like electrical equipment running, but deeper somehow, more organic. When I got up to investigate, walking from room to room trying to locate the source, it would fade away completely, leaving me standing in perfect silence wondering if I'd imagined the whole thing. The first time I felt truly unsettled was during one of those quiet evenings when the house usually felt most peaceful. I was in the kitchen, washing dishes and looking out the window at the darkening yard when I caught sight of my reflection in the glass, but something was wrong with it. The reflection seemed to be moving just slightly out of sync with my actual movements, like there was a tiny delay between what I was doing and what I was seeing. I stopped moving completely and stared at myself in the window, but everything looked normal again. When I raised my hand to wave, the reflection waved back at exactly the right moment. I told myself it was fatigue. I'd been working long hours, staying up too late, probably straining my eyes. These things happen when you spend too much time alone, when your mind doesn't have enough external stimulation to keep it anchored to reality. I made myself a cup of tea and went to bed early, convinced that a good night's sleep would clear away whatever strange mood had settled over me. But the sleep didn't help. If anything, it made things worse. I started waking up in the middle of the night with the distinct feeling that I wasn't alone in the house. Not the comfortable presence of familiar ghosts or memories, but something active, something aware. I would lie perfectly still in bed, listening to the silence, trying to convince myself that the small sounds I was hearing were just the normal settling of an old house. But they didn't sound normal anymore. They sounded deliberate, purposeful, like footsteps that were trying very hard not to be heard. The humming sound became more frequent and louder. Sometimes I could hear it even when I was outside, as if it was following me rather than coming from any specific location. It would start as barely a whisper, then gradually increase in volume until it filled my entire awareness, making it impossible to focus on anything else. The frequency would shift slowly, rising and falling in patterns that felt almost like communication, like something trying to establish contact using a language I didn't understand. I began to notice the metallic smell around the same time. Sweet and sharp, like copper pennies mixed with something floral, it would appear suddenly in different parts of the house without any apparent source. I would walk into a room and be hit by this overwhelming scent, so strong it made my eyes water, but when I tried to trace it to its origin, it would vanish as quickly as it had come. Sometimes I would smell it on my clothes, in my hair, as if it was clinging to me even when I left the house entirely. The mirrors started bothering me more than anything else, not just the cracked one in that dim room, but all of them throughout the house. I began to avoid looking at them directly because I could never shake the feeling that what I was seeing wasn't quite right. The angles seemed wrong somehow, showing me perspectives that didn't match where I was standing. Sometimes I would catch glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, reflections of things that weren't there when I turned to look. I tried to rationalize everything. Old houses have electrical issues, strange acoustics, peculiar lighting. Isolation can play tricks on your mind, make you hypersensitive to normal sounds and sensations. I even called someone to check the wiring, convinced that faulty electrical systems were causing the humming and the flickering lights. But everything tested perfectly normal. The technician spent hours going through the house and found nothing that could explain what I was experiencing. That's when I realized I was trying to solve the wrong problem. This wasn't about the house at all. It was about me, or rather about something that had taken an interest in me. The signs weren't random electrical failures or acoustic anomalies. They were communications, attempts at contact from something that existed just outside the boundaries of what I could perceive directly. The moment I understood this, everything changed. It was like acknowledging its presence gave it permission to become more active, more obvious in its attempts to reach me. The humming grew loud enough that I could feel it vibrating in my chest, making my heart race and my breathing shallow. The metallic smell became so strong that I could taste it, coating the inside of my mouth with that sweet copper flavor that made me nauseous. But the worst part was the feeling of being watched. Not occasionally, not just in certain rooms or at certain times, but constantly, relentlessly, as if invisible eyes were tracking my every movement. I could feel the weight of that attention pressing down on me, making my skin crawl with goosebumps that had nothing to do with temperature. When I tried to sleep, I could sense something standing just outside my field of vision, patient and persistent, waiting for me to acknowledge its presence. The electronic devices in the house began behaving erratically. My phone would turn on by itself in the middle of the night, the screen blazing with harsh white light that hurt my eyes. The television would switch channels randomly, cycling through static and fragments of programs that didn't seem to exist on any actual stations. My computer would open applications I'd never installed, displaying screens full of symbols and characters that looked almost like text, but in no language I recognized. I started experiencing physical symptoms that I couldn't explain. Whenever I got near any electronic device, I would feel a crushing pressure in my chest, like someone was squeezing my lungs. My hands would shake uncontrollably, and I would break out in cold sweats that left me feeling weak and disoriented. It got so bad that I could barely use my phone or computer, could barely function in a world that depends so heavily on electronic communication. The breaking point came during what should have been an ordinary evening. I was sitting in the living room, trying to read despite the constant low-grade anxiety that had become my normal state, when every electronic device in the house activated simultaneously. Lights blazed and flickered in rapid succession. The television blared static at maximum volume. My phone rang with a piercing tone I'd never heard before, and that humming sound rose to a pitch so high it felt like it was drilling into my skull. In the chaos of light and sound, I saw something that made my blood freeze. In the cracked mirror across the room, my reflection was standing perfectly still while I was doubled over in pain from the noise. But it wasn't just still, it was looking directly at me with an expression I'd never seen on my own face. An expression of recognition, of satisfaction, like it had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. The reflection raised its hand and waved at me. Not the confused, experimental wave I'd done weeks earlier, but a deliberate greeting, acknowledging that we could finally see each other clearly. I watched in horror as my reflection mouthed words I wasn't speaking, its lips moving in patterns that looked like they might be my name, repeated over and over with increasing urgency. Then everything stopped. The lights went out, the television fell silent, my phone went dark, and the humming faded to nothing. I sat in complete darkness and absolute silence, more terrified of the quiet than I had been of the chaos, because in that silence I could hear something else. Breathing that wasn't my own, coming from somewhere very close, as if someone was standing right beside me in the dark. I don't remember leaving the house that night. I don't remember packing or making any conscious decision to go. My next clear memory is of being in a motel room several hours away, sitting on the edge of the bed with no luggage, no plan, no clear understanding of how I'd gotten there. I had driven through the night in a state of panic so complete that it had erased itself from my memory, leaving only fragments of headlights and highway lines and the desperate need to put distance between myself and whatever I'd left behind. I never went back. I abandoned everything: furniture, photographs, books, all the accumulated possessions of a lifetime, and started over in a place where nobody knew my history. I told myself that distance would solve the problem, that whatever had been happening was tied to that specific location, that house, those rooms where I'd spent so many months alone. But distance doesn't work the way I hoped it would. The humming followed me, faint at first, so quiet I could almost convince myself it was just the sound of air conditioning or traffic, but gradually growing more distinct, more familiar. The metallic smell appears without warning, usually when I'm feeling most relaxed, most convinced that I've escaped. The pressure in my chest returns whenever I'm around electronic devices, making it difficult to work, to communicate, to live normally in a world that depends on technology. The mirrors are the worst part. No matter where I live, no matter how carefully I avoid them, I catch glimpses of that same wrong reflection. It's more subtle now, harder to detect, but it's there. Sometimes I see it moving independently in store windows as I walk past. Sometimes I notice it in the black screen of my phone, watching me with that same expression of patient recognition. I've tried to convince myself that trauma can create persistent hallucinations, that isolation and stress can rewire your brain in ways that make reality feel unstable. I've read about psychological conditions that could explain everything I experienced, disorders that make people feel watched, that create sensory hallucinations, that blur the line between internal experience and external reality. But knowledge doesn't make the experiences stop. Understanding the possible psychological mechanisms doesn't make the humming any less real or the metallic taste any less overwhelming. And it doesn't explain the glass that's still in my shoe, the physical remnant of that cracked mirror that somehow traveled with me despite the fact that I left everything behind. I feel it every day, that small, sharp pressure against my heel with every step I take. I've tried to remove it, spent hours examining my shoe, my foot, searching for any trace of the glass I know must be there. But there's nothing visible, nothing I can extract or heal or fix, just the constant reminder that some experiences leave marks that can't be seen or treated or explained away. The worst part is the certainty that it's not over. Whatever made contact with me in that house, whatever used my reflection to communicate, it's still there. Still watching, still waiting, still trying to bridge the gap between its reality and mine. Distance doesn't matter to something that exists outside normal physical boundaries. Time doesn't diminish its patience or its interest. I can feel it now even as I tell you this story. That familiar pressure building in my chest, the faint taste of copper on my tongue, the almost inaudible humming that makes my skin crawl with recognition. Speaking about it out loud has made it stronger, more present, like calling its name has given it permission to step closer. I thought that telling someone would help, that sharing the burden would make it lighter somehow. But I realize now that I've made a terrible mistake. By speaking its existence into the world, by acknowledging it in your presence, I may have given it a new path to follow, a new connection to explore. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry if I've passed something on to you just by telling you this story. Because now when you look in mirrors, you might notice small discrepancies in your reflection. When you're alone in quiet rooms, you might hear that low humming sound growing slowly louder. When you smell something metallic and sweet with no apparent source, you'll remember my words and wonder if you're next. The truth is, I don't think I ever really left that house. I think part of me is still there, still sitting in that dim room with the cracked mirror, still tracing patterns in the dust while something watches from the other side of the glass. And now that I've spoken about it, now that I've opened this door between my experience and yours, I'm afraid that you might be there too, trapped in the same endless moment, feeling the same invisible glass cutting into your heel with every step you try to take away from what you've heard. I can hear it humming now, closer than ever before, and I know that telling this story was never about finding peace or closure. It was about finding company in the strange space between realities, about making sure I wouldn't have to face whatever comes next entirely alone. Story 6. It resonated like a solitary piano key struck at an odd hour. The dusky room absorbed the sound, though its presence felt intrusive. I stood in the middle of the parlor, surrounded by silence that seemed too absolute. The note lingered, wrapping around me like an old, forgotten tune that once meant safety. Logic urged me to seek its source, a draft perhaps, or an errant breeze, but the sense of belonging was uncannily familiar. It felt like the echo wasn't new, like it should be here within these walls, yet wasn't. The room seemed to hum in response, a vibration just below conscious thought, drawing me toward an image I couldn't quite see. The note told again, its clarity against the hush undeniable. I hadn't heard that sound since it stopped. The buzzing came first, I think, or maybe it was always there, hiding beneath other sounds until everything else went quiet. It wasn't the lazy drone of summer insects or the electric hum of appliances. This was sharper, more deliberate, like metal vibrating against metal, but softer somehow, organic. It would start low, barely perceptible, then climb until my teeth ached with it. The smell came with it, copper pennies left in rain, or maybe blood that had dried on something warm. I remember pressing my palms against my ears, but the buzzing didn't diminish. If anything, it grew clearer, as if it was coming from inside my skull. My skin prickled with static electricity, every hair standing on end. When I opened my eyes, the air itself seemed to shimmer. Someone was watching me sleep. I know this the way you know you're falling in a dream, that sudden, undeniable certainty that jerks you awake. But I wasn't asleep, was I? I was lying there in the dark, my eyes closed, breathing steady, and I could feel their presence like heat from a fire. Not threatening exactly, more like curious, patient. The weight of their attention pressed against my eyelids, and I absolutely knew that if I opened them, I would see something I wasn't ready to see. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept still, kept pretending. The presence lingered, and I felt it tilt its head, considering. Then it was gone, leaving behind only the faint impression of displacement, like air rushing to fill an empty space. When I finally opened my eyes, the room felt larger than it should have been. My thoughts started tangling. Simple words would slip away mid-sentence, leaving me grasping at syllables that dissolved like sugar in water. I'd walk into a room and forget why I'd come, but remember instead the exact temperature of the air, the way dust motes spiraled in afternoon light, the sound my footsteps made on floorboards that seemed to echo longer than they should. Numbers became impossible. Time stretched and contracted without warning. I'd glance at a clock and see minutes that made no sense, hands pointing in directions that defied reason. My reflection in mirrors looked slightly off, as if I were seeing myself from an angle that shouldn't exist. Colors seemed more saturated, but wrong, somehow green that was too green, shadows that held depths they'd never had before. I began writing notes to myself, but when I read them later, the handwriting looked foreign, the words arranged in patterns I didn't remember creating. The lights came in pulses like a heartbeat made visible. They started as pinpricks, scattered across my vision like stars, then swelled until they filled the entire space behind my eyelids. Even with my eyes open, they persisted white-hot flashes that left afterimages burned into my retina. The sound that accompanied them wasn't quite sound, more like pressure against my eardrums, a rhythm that seemed to sync with something deep in my chest. Objects in the room cast multiple shadows, each one slightly offset from the others, creating a layered effect that made depth impossible to judge. I reached for something familiar, a book, a cup, anything solid, but my hand passed through spaces that should have been occupied. The air tasted metallic, electric, like the moment before lightning strikes. When the flashing stopped, the silence that followed felt hollow, as if something essential had been extracted from the world. I can't stop checking locks now. Door locks, window latches, the latch on my jewelry box, even the clasp on my watch. My fingers trace the mechanisms obsessively, testing their integrity, making sure they're engaged properly. But engaged against what, I don't know, and that's what makes it worse. The compulsion is strongest in the morning, when shadows are long and the house settles into its daytime rhythms. I'll spend 20 minutes on a single doorknob, turning it, testing the resistance, feeling for that solid click that means security. Sometimes I find them already unlocked, though I'm certain I secured them the night before. Other times they resist my touch, as if the metal has grown cold and stiff overnight. My fingertips are raw from the constant checking, but I can't stop. The alternative, leaving something unsecured, feels impossible, dangerous in a way I can't articulate. But maybe the lights were different that time. Maybe they weren't white at all, but blue-green, like deep ocean water or the glow inside old television tubes. And maybe I wasn't alone when they started. There was a figure beside me, wasn't there? Someone whose breathing matched mine, whose presence felt like an anchor in the chaos. They didn't speak, but their hand found mine, fingers interlacing with a familiarity that suggested this had happened before, many times before. The pressure in my ears became a melody, something almost recognizable, almost beautiful. When I turned to look at them, their face was my face, but older, wearier, marked by experiences I hadn't had yet. They smiled with my mouth and said something I couldn't hear over the humming that had started up again. Or maybe they said nothing at all, and I only imagined the movement of their lips because I needed words, needed meaning in a moment that offered none. I don't try to understand anymore. Understanding requires a kind of linear thinking that feels foreign now, like a language I used to speak fluently but can no longer access. The fragments remain fragments, and I've learned to live in the spaces between them. Some mornings I wake with the taste of copper on my tongue and the echo of that piano note still reverberating in my chest. Some evenings I catch myself listening for footsteps that never come or came long ago, or are coming still in some version of time that runs parallel to this one. The buzzing has become a kind of companion, a constant that provides its own strange comfort. I no longer press my palms against my ears when it starts. Instead, I let it wash over me, through me, carrying with it the scent of rain on metal and the memory of lights that may have been stars or warnings or simply the way my mind chose to process something too vast for ordinary perception. I am different now, changed in ways that don't have names, and I think sometimes in the moments between sleeping and waking that this was always going to happen. That I was always walking toward this version of myself, this fractured understanding, this peace with not knowing. The note still sounds somewhere in the distance, calling me toward or away from something I may never be able to name. Story 7. It seemed so ordinary at first, the sound of the clock in the hallway, a steady companion marking time with each quiet tick. Every hour it clicked into place, an infallible rhythm that soothed the mind with its constancy. But then on a Tuesday, the click came a second late, a subtle shift so minor it could easily be dismissed. By Friday, the tick was softer, almost a murmur against the quiet. This morning, I could swear it skipped altogether. Now the clock looks the same, reliably keeping time, yet the unease lingers. I can't help but wonder if it's still the clock I've always known. The buzzing started after that, not in my ears exactly, but somewhere deeper, like it was coming from inside my bones. I'd wake up with my fingertips numb, the taste of copper coating my tongue. The sheets would be damp, but not from sweat, something else, something that smelled like rain on hot metal. I keep touching the walls now. They feel different, softer somehow, like they're breathing when I'm not looking. The paint hasn't changed, same cream color it's always been, but when I press my palm against it, there's a warmth that wasn't there before, a pulse. There were lights behind the trees. The mirror in the bathroom reflects everything correctly. My face, the shower curtain, the small window with its frosted glass. But sometimes when I'm brushing my teeth, I catch something moving in the peripheral reflection. Not me, something that shifts when I'm perfectly still. I've learned not to look directly. Looking directly makes the buzzing louder. The clock ticks normally now. Perfect rhythm, steady companion, but I know it's lying. I dream of doors that are slightly ajar. Always the same door painted white with a brass handle that's warm to the touch. In the dream, I'm walking toward it, my bare feet silent on wooden floors. The buzzing grows stronger with each step. Behind the door, there's a light that doesn't behave like light should. It moves like water, pooling in corners, dripping upward. The noise didn't come from outside. When I wake, my hand is reaching toward something. The motion feels familiar, rehearsed, like I've been reaching for the same thing night after night. My fingers tingle with the memory of touching something smooth and impossibly cold. But there's nothing there, just empty air and the smell of ozone. The walls breathe more noticeably now. I can see them expand and contract if I watch from the corner of my eye. The paint hasn't cracked, the surface remains smooth. But underneath, something moves with the rhythm of sleeping lungs. I've started timing it. 23 seconds in, 17 seconds out. Always the same pattern. I don't remember ever coming back. The supermarket feels wrong now. The fluorescent lights flicker in sequences that seem intentional. 3 short, too long pause, 3 short, too long pause. The checkout clerk's eyes are the right color, but they don't focus quite where they should. She looks through me when she speaks, as if I'm not entirely there, as if I'm becoming transparent. The milk tastes metallic, the bread feels too soft between my fingers. Everything I touch leaves a residue on my skin that I can't wash off. Not dirt, something else. Something that makes my fingertips sensitive to textures that shouldn't exist. The door in my dreams is opening wider. I can see more of the light now, how it moves in patterns that hurt to remember. It whispers without sound, forms words in a language I understand but have never learned. The brass handle burns my palm, but I can't let go. Behind me, footsteps echo in empty hallways, keeping time with a clock that no longer ticks. There were lights behind the trees, and they knew my name. I'm losing time during the day now. I'll be washing dishes, and suddenly the water is cold, my hands pruned, the soap dissolved. The clock says an hour has passed, but I remember only the first few seconds. The sink is full of clean dishes I don't remember washing. They're arranged in patterns I wouldn't normally make, symmetrical, purposeful. The buzzing has a rhythm now. It matches the breathing of the walls, the flicker of distant lights, the pulse I feel when I touch surfaces that should be inanimate. Everything is synchronized to something I can't identify, something that feels like it's been waiting for me to notice. My reflection moves a fraction of a second after I do. The delay is getting longer. Sometimes I'll turn my head and my reflection will continue staring straight ahead for several heartbeats before following. Its eyes hold an expression I don't recognize, a knowledge I don't remember acquiring. The door is almost fully open now. Through the gap I can see a room that extends beyond what the house should contain. The light pools on surfaces that shouldn't exist, illuminates corners that fold in on themselves. The air tastes like the moment before lightning strikes, sharp, electric, alive. I don't remember ever coming back, but something did. The clock has stopped ticking altogether. The hands still move, still mark time, but in silence. The absence of sound is louder than the buzzing, which has become a constant companion. I feel it in my teeth now, vibrating through my skull, harmonizing with frequencies I shouldn't be able to hear. My fingers leave impressions in solid wood now, not dense impressions, as if the matter becomes temporarily soft under my touch. The sensation is familiar, like remembering how to ride a bicycle. My body knows this feeling, even though my mind insists it's impossible. The walls are breathing faster. The rhythm has changed from sleeping lungs to something more urgent, anticipatory. The cream-colored paint ripples like water when I'm not watching directly. In my peripheral vision, the entire house seems to pulse with life. There were lights behind the trees, and they knew my name, and they're coming closer. I stand before the white door now, even when I'm awake. It exists in the hallway where the clock hangs silent, occupying space that was never there before. The brass handle is warm, inviting. Beyond it, the light moves in patterns that make my vision blur, that make the buzzing in my bones sing in harmonies I can almost understand. My reflection no longer follows my movements. It watches me with eyes that hold memories I can't access, knowledge I'm not ready to reclaim. Sometimes it mouths words I can't hear, warnings or invitations in a voice that sounds like mine but isn't. The door is opening by itself now, slowly, inevitably. The light spills out in waves, washing over surfaces that bend and breathe under its touch. The air shimmers with possibilities I can't name, realities I can't quite grasp. I reach for the handle and my fingers remember its weight, its temperature, the way it turns with the smoothness of countless repetitions. This has happened before. This is always happening. The noise didn't come from outside, and it never stopped, and now I understand why the clock learned to lie. Behind me, footsteps echo in rhythm with the breathing walls, with the flickering lights, with the pulse that runs through everything now. The house has become something else, or perhaps it always was, and I'm only now remembering how to see it. I don't remember ever coming back, but I never really left. The door stands open, patient as always, waiting for me to cross the threshold into the light that knows my name. The buzzing in my bones rises to a crescendo, harmonizing with sounds that exist beyond hearing, beyond understanding. And somewhere in the distance, a clock begins to tick again, marking time that moves in directions I'm finally ready to follow. It seemed so ordinary at first, the sound of the clock in the hallway keeping perfect time, just as it always has, just as it always will, counting moments that circle back to where they began. Story 8. The clock hands didn't move past noon. I pressed my ear to its smooth face, expecting the reassuring tick, but there was only quiet. My footsteps should have echoed on the tiles as I crossed the room, yet the silence clung heavily, absorbing every step. The curtains hung limp, casting no shadows in the midday light. I reached for the table, but the surface felt foreign, like a memory trying too hard to be real. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting. I glanced at the clock once more, its stillness mocking my certainty. That was 3 weeks ago, or maybe 3 months. Time feels different now, stretched and compressed like taffy pulled too thin. I wake each morning with the taste of copper on my tongue and the sensation that I've been walking for hours, though my feet are clean and my shoes sit untouched by the door. The buzzing started that same day, a low frequency that seems to come from inside my bones rather than my ears. It's strongest when I'm alone, weakest when there are others around, as if it knows when to hide. I've checked the electrical outlets, the fluorescent lights, even called someone to look at the wiring. They found nothing wrong. But I know something is wrong. There's a door in my house that I don't remember opening, yet I find it ajar every morning. The gap is always the same width, just enough for light to spill through in a thin, vertical line. When I close it, the click echoes strangely, like the sound is bouncing off surfaces that shouldn't be there. The light behind that door isn't the right color. It's too white, too clean, like the inside of something that was never meant to be seen. I dream of walking through rooms that breathe. The walls expand and contract with a rhythm that matches my heartbeat, and the floor gives slightly under my feet, warm and yielding. In these dreams, there's always a presence just outside my peripheral vision, something that moves when I'm not looking directly at it. The copper taste is stronger when I wake from these dreams. There were lights behind the trees. That thought appears without context, sudden and insistent. I live in a place with no trees near my windows, yet the memory feels real. Lights that pulsed with the same rhythm as the breathing walls, casting shadows that moved independently of their sources. The buzzing grows louder when I think about the lights. I've started keeping a journal, trying to capture these fragments before they slip away. But when I read what I've written, the words seem to rearrange themselves, forming sentences I don't remember composing. My handwriting, but thoughts that feel foreign, describing sensations I'm not sure I've experienced. The air tasted of ozone and something else, something alive. My reflection in the window showed someone standing behind me, but when I turned, there was only empty space. The sound didn't come from outside. That last line appears in my journal 17 times, written in different inks on different pages. I don't remember writing it even once. The door is open again this morning. The light spills across the floor in that same thin line, but today there are shadows moving within it. Not the sharp-edged shadows of familiar objects, but something fluid, organic. They pulse with the rhythm I remember from my dreams. I approach slowly, my bare feet silent on the cold tiles. The buzzing intensifies with each step, and the copper taste floods my mouth. My hand reaches for the door handle, fingers trembling not with fear, but with a recognition I can't name. The metal is warm to the touch, warmer than it should be, warmer than anything in this still, breathless house has any right to be. I don't remember ever coming back. Another unbidden thought, but this one carries weight, carries the echo of truth. Coming back from where? The question hovers at the edge of my consciousness, refusing to form completely. Time slips again. I'm standing in the kitchen, staring at the clock that still refuses to move past noon. The light outside hasn't changed, hasn't shifted the way daylight should. It's the same flat, shadowless illumination that makes everything look slightly unreal. My reflection in the window above the sink shows someone I almost recognize. The same face, the same eyes, but there's something different in the expression. A knowledge that wasn't there before, or maybe the absence of something that should be. The person in the reflection mouths words I'm not speaking, and for a moment I can almost hear them through the glass. The buzzing stops. The silence that follows is deeper than quiet, deeper than the absence of sound. It's the silence of held breath, of paused time, of something waiting just beyond the threshold of perception. I turn from the window, and the door at the end of the hall stands wide open. Not ajar, not partially open, but completely, fully open, revealing a space that shouldn't exist. The too white light pours out like liquid, and within it, shapes move with purpose. Not quite human shapes, but not entirely foreign either. My feet carry me forward without conscious decision. The tiles under my feet give way to something softer, something that responds to my weight with that same breathing rhythm from my dreams. The walls around me pulse gently, and the air grows thick with the scent of ozone and copper. There's a presence here, patient and vast. It doesn't speak, doesn't need to. Communication happens through sensation, through the tingling that starts in my fingertips and spreads up my arms, through the warmth that blooms in my chest despite the chill that should be there. Time stretches or contracts or stops entirely. I'm aware of being observed, studied, known in ways that feel both intimate and clinical. The buzzing returns, but now it's inside me, part of me, harmonizing with the rhythm of my pulse and the breathing of the walls. Something is taken or given or exchanged. The distinction blurs like everything else in this space that exists between moments, between heartbeats, between the tick that never comes and the talk that never follows. The noise didn't come from outside. The thought returns as I find myself back in the kitchen, staring at the motionless clock. The door at the end of the hall is closed, has always been closed, will always be closed, but the thin line of light beneath it pulses with familiar rhythm. My journal sits open on the counter, filled with handwriting I recognize but don't remember creating. Page after page of observations, descriptions, fragments of experience that feel both foreign and intimately familiar. The walls breathed in colors I don't have names for. Time isn't linear here. It pools and eddies like water around stones. They don't speak with words. They speak with touch, with light, with the spaces between thoughts. I offered something, they offered something in return. The exchange is ongoing. The last entry is dated today, written in handwriting that's almost mine but not quite. The letters are too precise, too deliberate, as if formed by someone still learning the mechanics of human script. The buzzing has become part of the silence now, a frequency that exists just below the threshold of hearing but above the level of forgetting. It's strongest when I'm alone, when the house settles into its unnatural quiet and the light outside maintains its shadowless consistency. I check the door, still closed, still leaking that thin line of light, but when I press my ear against its surface, I can hear something on the other side. Not voices, not footsteps, but a sound like breathing. Deep, patient, rhythmic breathing that matches the pulse I feel in my fingertips. The copper taste never fully leaves my mouth now. It's become as much a part of me as the buzzing, as the dreams of breathing walls, as the certainty that something fundamental has changed in ways I'm not equipped to understand. I dream of walking through spaces that exist between spaces, guided by presences that cast no shadows but leave impressions in the air like the memory of warmth. In these dreams, I'm both myself and not myself, observing and observed, changed and changing. When I wake, there are marks on my arms, not bruises, not cuts, but something else. Patterns that shift depending on the angle of light, visible only in my peripheral vision. When I look directly at them, they fade, but I can feel them there, warm and somehow alive. The journal continues to fill itself. Pages of observations written in handwriting that grows less like mine with each entry. The thoughts recorded there are becoming clearer, more detailed, describing experiences I'm not sure I'm having or remembering or imagining. The exchange is deeper than I understood, not just observation, but integration. They're learning from me as much as I'm learning from them. The process is mutual, symbiotic. The door was never really closed. The light was always there. I just learned how to see it. The clock hands still don't move past noon. I've stopped expecting them to. Time here operates by different rules, rules I'm beginning to understand without being able to articulate them. The presence is stronger now, less distant. Sometimes I catch glimpses of it in reflections, in the space between blinks, in the pause between one thought and the next. It's patient but not passive, observing but not detached. We're learning each other's languages. The buzzing has evolved into something more complex, more nuanced. Patterns within patterns, meanings within meanings. It's not just sound anymore, but communication, information, connection. I understand now why the door was always ajar. Not an invitation, but a preparation, a gradual introduction to something too vast to be approached directly. The mind needs time to adjust, to expand, to accommodate new forms of awareness. The copper taste has become sweet. There were lights behind the trees, and now I remember walking toward them. Not walking with my feet, but with my consciousness, drawn by curiosity rather than compulsion. The lights pulsed with welcome, with recognition, with the promise of exchange. I offered my human perspective, my linear experience of time, my singular way of perceiving reality. In return, I received something larger, something that exists in multiple dimensions simultaneously, something that experiences existence as a vast, interconnected web of consciousness. The exchange is ongoing. I closed the journal, though I'm not sure when I opened it. The handwriting in the final entries is no longer recognizably mine, but the thoughts feel more authentic than anything I've ever written. They describe experiences I'm having, will have, am always having in the space between moments. The door at the end of the hall stands slightly ajar. The gap is the same width it's always been, just enough for light to spill through in a thin, vertical line. But now I understand that the light isn't spilling out. It's spilling in. The clock hands don't move past noon, and I press my ear to its smooth face, expecting silence. But there's something else now, something that might be the sound of time itself, patient and eternal, and utterly unlike the mechanical ticking I once knew. The buzzing harmonizes with it, and I realize that what I've been hearing all along isn't a malfunction or an intrusion. It's the sound of connection being established. The sound of two forms of consciousness learning to communicate across the vast difference of their natures. The sound of something that began the moment I first noticed the clock had stopped, and will continue long after I understand what stopping and starting really mean. I glance at the clock once more, its stillness no longer mocking but welcoming, and I know that noon isn't when it stopped. Noon is when it started, story 9. I was seated by the window, counting heartbeats against the muffled rhythm beyond. The engine outside spluttered, a persistent thrumming that seemed to falter just as it should have roared to life. The shadows of trees danced against the dimly lit walls, swaying as if they whispered secrets among themselves. Nothing else shifted, not the curtains, not the cool air brushing past my face. Somewhere behind the walls, unexplained rustlings grew silent, as if waiting alongside me. My ears strained for the signal to break this uneasy stillness. Then, unexpectedly, the streetlight flickered twice and went out, leaving a darker abyss than before. That was when the dreams began. The first one came on a night when exhaustion felt heavier than usual. I'd been working too much, sleeping too little, and my mind had that frayed quality that comes from pushing beyond reasonable limits. In the dream, I was lying in my own bed, but something was different. A soft, amber light filtered through the ceiling, not harsh but persistent, like sunlight through honey. It shouldn't have been there. My bedroom has no skylight, no source for light to enter from above. I remember trying to move my head to look directly at it, but my neck felt weighted down, as if gravity had doubled while I slept. The light pulsed gently, rhythmically, like breathing, like something alive was controlling it from somewhere I couldn't see. There was a faint humming too, so low I felt it more than heard it, vibrating through the mattress and into my bones. When I woke, morning light was streaming through the regular window, ordinary and pale. I dismissed the dream easily enough. Stress does strange things to the mind, creates phantom sensations and impossible geometries in sleep. The amber light was probably just my brain's way of processing the street light that had been flickering outside my window lately. But the dream returned 3 nights later, and this time it lasted longer. The same amber light, the same paralyzed feeling in my limbs, but now there were additional details that felt more real than the waking world around me. The humming was clearer, more intentional, as if someone was adjusting frequencies on equipment I couldn't see. My skin tingled with a sensation like static electricity, but warmer, almost comforting in its strangeness. I could hear something else too, a voice perhaps, but so distorted and distant that the words dissolved before reaching my understanding. It had a metallic quality, like speech filtered through old radio equipment. The voice seemed to be asking questions, pausing as if waiting for responses I couldn't give. The light above me moved this time, drifting slowly from one side of my vision to the other. It maintained its oval shape, its steady pulsing, but now it seemed to be examining me, studying me with an intelligence that made my sleeping skin crawl with awareness. I woke with my heart hammering against my ribs, the taste of copper filling my mouth. The morning felt thin and unconvincing compared to the weight of whatever I'd just experienced. But dreams are dreams, I told myself. Even vivid ones fade when daylight burns them away. Then I began noticing things. Small things at first, objects that seemed to have shifted positions while I slept. My coffee mug on the kitchen counter moved 6 inches to the left. A book I'd left open, now closed, with a different bookmark inside. The kind of details that could easily be explained by forgetfulness or distraction, but they accumulated like dust in corners I couldn't quite reach. One morning I found a small mark on my forearm, perfectly circular, about the size of a dime. The skin was slightly raised and tinged with a faint amber color, like a healing bruise that had never been purple. I had no memory of injuring myself, no recollection of bumping into anything that could have left such a precise impression. The mark didn't hurt, but it felt warm to the touch, warmer than the rest of my skin. When I pressed it gently, I could swear I felt that same low humming from the dreams, vibrating beneath the surface. Electronics began behaving strangely around me. My phone would display static for brief moments, lines of interference scrolling across the screen like digital rain. The television would change channels on its own, always landing on empty frequencies that hissed with white noise. My laptop would freeze whenever I tried to research anything related to unusual dreams or unexplained phenomena. The third dream was different from the others, more vivid than any reality I'd ever experienced. This time I wasn't paralyzed. I could move, could sit up and look around, but the world had become fluid and strange. My bedroom walls stretched impossibly high, disappearing into darkness above the amber light that now hung like a small sun in the vast space. The humming had become a symphony of frequencies, some so low they made my teeth ache, others so high they seemed to bypass my ears entirely and vibrate directly against my skull. The metallic voice was clearer now, speaking words in a language that felt familiar but remained just beyond comprehension. It asked questions that I understood emotionally, even though the sounds meant nothing to my conscious mind. Questions about memory, about consent, about the thin boundaries between sleep and waking. Time moved strangely in this expanded version of my room. I felt as though I'd been sitting there for hours, listening to the voice, watching the light pulse and shift colors from amber to silver to something that had no name. But when I tried to count seconds or measure the passage of moments, numbers became meaningless. I felt watched, examined, catalogued, not by hostile eyes, but by something clinical and thorough, like being studied by researchers who viewed me as a fascinating specimen rather than a person. The sensation was more unsettling than outright fear would have been. When I finally woke, the sun was setting outside my window. I'd lost an entire day. After that, the boundaries began to blur. I would hear the humming during quiet moments in my waking life, faint but unmistakable, coming from no identifiable source. The amber light would flicker at the edges of my vision when I was reading or working, never there when I turned to look directly but persistent in my peripheral awareness. The mark on my arm began to change, developing a pattern of concentric circles that seemed to shift and reorganize themselves when I wasn't paying attention. Sometimes it would glow faintly in dark rooms, casting shadows that moved independently of my movements. I started losing track of time regularly. I'd sit down to eat breakfast and suddenly find myself holding an empty plate with no memory of eating. I'd begin reading a page and discover I'd somehow finished the entire book without conscious awareness of turning pages or processing words. Sleep became unreliable. I would lie down exhausted and immediately find myself in that expanded room with the impossible ceiling, but when I checked afterward, only minutes had passed. Other times I'd close my eyes for what felt like seconds and wake to find the sun in a completely different position. The voice in the dreams grew more insistent, more personal. It began using inflections that reminded me of conversations I'd had, adopting speech patterns that felt like echoes of my own thoughts. Sometimes it would repeat things I'd said during the day, but filtered through that metallic distortion that made my own words sound alien and strange. I began to suspect that the dreams weren't dreams at all, but memories of something that had actually happened, something my conscious mind had been made to forget or had chosen not to remember. The details were too consistent, too persistent, too intricately connected to the changes I was experiencing in my waking life. The amber light had become a constant presence, visible even in bright daylight if I knew how to look for it. It followed me from room to room, maintaining its steady pulse, its sense of patient observation. Sometimes I would catch glimpses of it reflected in mirrors or windows, hanging just behind my shoulder like a faithful companion. The humming had evolved into something more complex, a layered composition of frequencies that seemed to correspond to my emotional states. When I felt anxious, higher notes would join the bass drone. When I was calm, the sound would settle into deeper, more resonant tones that made my bones feel heavy and warm. I realized I was no longer afraid of these experiences. They had become familiar, comforting even, like returning to a home I'd never consciously known I had. The voice in the dreams had begun to feel less like an interrogator and more like an old friend, someone who knew me better than I knew myself. The mark on my arm had spread, or perhaps revealed itself more fully. The circular pattern now extended up my forearm in spiraling designs that looked almost like circuitry, glowing faintly with that warm amber light. When I traced the lines with my finger, I could feel information flowing through them, data streams of sensation and memory that bypassed my normal cognitive processes. Last night I had the dream again. The same expanded room, the same impossible geometry, the same patient voice asking its careful questions. But this time when I woke, something was different. The amber light was still there, hanging above my bed, pulsing with its steady rhythm. But I was awake, fully, completely awake, with morning sunlight streaming through my window and birds singing outside. The light didn't fade when I sat up. It didn't disappear when I rubbed my eyes or shook my head. It hung there in my ordinary bedroom, in my ordinary waking world, as real and solid as anything I'd ever seen. And as I watched, it pulsed once, twice, and began to descend toward me, humming with frequencies that made my amber-marked skin sing in harmonic response. I was seated by the window again, counting heartbeats against the muffled rhythm beyond, but now I understood that the engine had never been outside at all. Story 10. The whisper of paper brushing against paper reached me as I entered the dimly lit room. It was a soft rustling, an unmistakable sound of pages turning, though nothing moved in the dusky stacks lining the walls. I stopped, feeling the press of silence grow thicker around me, as if a voice trying to break through. The air smelled faintly of dust and ink, a blend that shouldn't have been there in this deserted place. The texture of the sound was familiar, an echo from a time and space I couldn't quite grasp but felt drawn to uncover. Each creak of the floorboards amplified the sensation, pulling me further into its gentle insistence. This sound shouldn't matter now, yet it did. I hear that rustling every night now, the same gentle whisper of pages turning in empty rooms, following me wherever I go. It's been weeks since I returned from that place, but the sound never left. Sometimes I wake to find books scattered across my floor, their pages splayed open to blank sections. Other times I catch the faint scent of ozone drifting through my apartment, even with all the windows sealed shut. The doctors say it's stress, sleep deprivation, post-traumatic response to isolation. They prescribe pills that make my thoughts feel wrapped in cotton, but the rustling continues. My family exchanges those careful glances people share when they think someone is losing their grip on reality. They listen with practiced patience as I try to explain what lingers in the periphery of my daily life. My electronics have developed their own rhythm. The television flickers on at irregular intervals, always tuned to static that seems to pulse with intention. The refrigerator hums in frequencies that make my teeth ache. My phone receives calls from numbers that don't exist, filled with that same paper-soft whispering. When I answer, there's only the sound of distant pages turning, as if someone is reading from a book written in a language I've never heard. I've started keeping a journal documenting each occurrence. The entries blur together after a while. The handwriting changes subtly from page to page, becoming more angular, more deliberate. Sometimes I find notes I don't remember writing, descriptions of sensations that feel familiar yet impossible. The ink appears fresh even on entries dated weeks ago. Sleep comes in fragments. When I do manage to drift off, I dream of vast spaces filled with the soft percussion of turning pages. In these dreams, I'm always searching for something specific, moving through corridors lined with books that seem to breathe. The pages flutter without wind, creating a symphony of whispers that almost forms words. I wake with the taste of metal on my tongue and the lingering impression that something was trying to communicate. The memory surfaces gradually, like developing film in a dark room. I remember standing in that observation station, watching the instruments register readings that shouldn't have been possible. The needles on the seismographs traced patterns too regular to be natural, too complex to be random. The radio equipment picked up transmissions on frequencies we weren't monitoring, filled with that rustling sound I now know so well. It was during my shift at the remote monitoring station. The facility sat on a plateau surrounded by nothing but scrubland and silence. My job was simple: record atmospheric readings, maintain the equipment, file reports. Weeks would pass without seeing another person. The isolation was supposed to be peaceful, meditative even. Instead, it became the backdrop for something I still can't properly categorize. The incident happened gradually, then all at once. I remember checking the barometric pressure readings and finding them fluctuating in impossible ways. The air itself seemed to thicken, carrying scents that had no business existing in that desolate place. Ozone, yes, but also something organic and unfamiliar, like the smell of rain on a planet with different soil. The lights began their dance on the third night. Not the harsh glare of spotlights or the warm glow of campfires, but something that seemed to emanate from the air itself. They moved with purpose, creating geometric patterns against the star-filled sky. I watched through the observation windows as they pulsed in rhythm with that soft rustling sound, which had grown stronger since sunset. My equipment registered the presence before my eyes could process what I was seeing. The electromagnetic sensors screamed with activity while my vision struggled to focus on the source. There, suspended above the plateau, was a structure that defied immediate comprehension. It wasn't solid in any conventional sense, more like a distortion in the air that suggested form without committing to it. The rustling sound emanated from its direction, growing louder as it descended. I stood transfixed, my training forgotten, as the thing settled onto the plateau with the gentleness of a falling leaf. Up close, it resembled a collection of translucent pages bound together by forces I couldn't identify. Each surface rippled like water, covered in symbols that shifted and changed as I watched. The rustling reached a crescendo as these pages turned of their own accord, revealing new configurations of markings that seemed to respond to my presence. Time became unreliable during the encounter. I remember fragments, the sensation of being read like a book myself, as if my thoughts were being transcribed onto those impossible pages. The taste of copper and electricity filled my mouth while my body felt simultaneously weightless and impossibly heavy. The thing communicated not through sound but through direct impression, leaving concepts in my mind that I lacked the vocabulary to express. When awareness returned, I found myself inside the observation station with no memory of moving. The equipment had recorded nothing unusual, showing only standard atmospheric readings for the entire night. Yet the metallic taste lingered, and that soft rustling had embedded itself in my perception like a song I couldn't stop humming. The signs had been accumulating for days before the encounter, though I didn't recognize them as connected at the time. The radio equipment picked up interference that sounded almost like conversation, but in frequencies too low for human speech. The seismic monitors registered vibrations that followed no geological pattern, creating rhythms that seemed intentional rather than natural. My sleep patterns shifted without my conscious awareness. I would find myself standing at the windows during what should have been my rest periods, staring out at the empty plateau with a sense of anticipation I couldn't explain. The air conditioning system developed an irregular cycle, creating temperature fluctuations that made the facility feel alive, breathing. Food began to taste different, carrying metallic undertones that reminded me of the smell before thunderstorms. Water from the taps had a faint ozone quality that made my throat feel coated after drinking. Even the familiar surfaces of the equipment seemed to vibrate under my touch, as if responding to some distant signal. The first anomaly was so subtle I almost dismissed it entirely. A sensation of being observed while performing routine maintenance on the antenna array. The feeling persisted despite the obvious isolation of the facility, growing stronger as the sun set behind the distant hills. I attributed it to the psychological effects of prolonged solitude, the way the mind creates company when none exists. But there was something else, something that preceded even that initial unease. A moment of perfect stillness that I now recognize as the calm before everything changed. I had been reviewing the day's readings when a profound quiet settled over the facility. Not just the absence of sound, but the presence of silence itself, as if the air had been replaced with something that absorbed vibration rather than carrying it. The morning had been unremarkable in every measurable way. Clear skies, steady atmospheric pressure, temperature readings within normal parameters. I performed the standard equipment checks with the routine efficiency of someone who had done the same tasks hundreds of times before. The radio chattered with distant weather reports, the seismic monitors traced their gentle curves, and the electromagnetic sensors registered nothing more exotic than the planet's own magnetic field. I remember feeling grateful for the assignment, appreciating the solitude and the simple rhythm of scientific observation. The facility provided everything necessary for extended isolation, reliable power, adequate supplies, communication equipment for emergencies. It seemed like the perfect environment for quiet contemplation and methodical work. The plateau stretched endlessly in all directions, covered in low scrub and punctuated by ancient rock formations that had weathered into smooth, organic shapes. During the day, the landscape held a stark beauty that made the isolation feel like a privilege rather than a burden. Wildlife was sparse but present, the occasional hawk circling overhead, small mammals rustling through the brush, insects creating their own subtle symphony as darkness approached. As evening settled over the plateau that first night, I felt a deep contentment with my circumstances. The work was meaningful, the environment pristine, and the silence felt like a gift after years of urban noise and distraction. I had no way of knowing that this peaceful moment was actually the final frame of normalcy, the last breath before something vast and incomprehensible turned its attention toward our small corner of existence and began, very gently, to read.